They're highlighting the fact that much of our reserves are being discovered deep offshore in the high seas in the continental shelf, a move away from the onshore, indeed the international oil communities that are not oil theft would be limited. These are perhaps the evolution of the oil and gas sector in Nigeria. Again, the new emphasis on gas, because Nigeria has more gas deposit than crude oil. We're likely going to see more of this in 2025. But joining me to take stock of the petroleum sector in 2024 and, of course, outlook for 2025 is a player in the sector, Samuel Diminas, Managing Director, Westpaq Engineering. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning.
So an eventful year for the petroleum sector in Nigeria, talking about 2024?
Yes, it was an eventful year. A lot of things were put in place. But as you know, with the oil and gas industry, a lot of the investments are going to pay off in the following years. Significantly, we're expecting a lot of things to be achieved by 2027. In 2025, we will see a lot of activities. This is as a consequence of the final investment decisions, key critical ones that have been taken, the Shell Bonga North, the Ubeta FID, and several other divestment mergers and acquisitions that have been closed between the IOCs and the national oil companies.
And so the investments we are seeing today or to be made around this period, we'll see the dividends play out in next few years. You're talking about 2027.
Yes. 2027, I'm actually talking about when we start seeing first oil from some of this investment. 2027 is also the date when you get production from the Ubeta non-associated gas development. So that is in terms of direct impact on revenues to the federal government. But there is a lot of activities that happen before then. You have engineering, FIDs, you have execution, the campaigns, and the construction and installation. So all these are also going to be happening. From a business perspective, that's a positive outlook. There will be economic activities. But in terms of when Nigeria can start saying we have increased production, we are banking more gas, we are banking more actual revenue, apart from the taxes that you're going to pay in VAT from the businesses that are occurring, you are looking more at 2027. Now, that's a very critical year.
Okay, we've seen final investment decisions made in deep offshore oil discoveries, but are we seeing much activities in the marginal fields? These are places where indigenous firms are holding sway, as it were.
Marginal field is a bit more complex. The reason is because, one of the major issues we have in Nigeria is funding. The local companies are doing well. Comparatively in Africa, Nigeria is about the only company that has a developed local ownership of the industry. Now, what does that...
That's a feat.
Yes, it is. Anyway, we are the largest and we have the most reserves, so it's expected of us. We lead that sector in Africa. We are losing sway, but we have the capacity. With marginal fields, you're looking at local companies running that show. The issue is funding. How do we fund that? How do we bank our projects? How do we get return on investment? And most of these marginal fields are also onshore. There are a lot of complexities, but we are beginning to see a situation where there's a turnaround, and there are some positives also that you would expect from.
Beyond funding for the indigenous firms, perhaps an industry-wide problem and challenge. What I'm hearing is that to procure the equipment, rigs for exploitation of crude oil is not a tea party. Perhaps swayed by the shift to renewable clean energy, the manufacturers are not churning out in the market. Some other countries and firms operating as well will quickly buy them up. How are Nigerian firms coping with acquiring the equipment to begin to expand our production?
Onshore. Okay. There are several factors. It doesn't have much to do with renewable energies. In Africa, so to speak, renewable energies, very good. We need that mix. but it's not significant, especially in Nigeria. In fact, even in the West, in the U.S., in Texas, it might not be as significant as the energy contribution of oil and gas. So the issue is this. Oil and gas projects are capital intensive. If you have a period where there is no activity for a long time, these equipments move. They would move out of the country. So yes, you're right. There is a lack of rigs, land rigs in the country. To mobilize these land rigs into the country, it's a lot of investment. And if you're looking at a marginal player, you're looking at what he's going to produce, how much can he pay you, and so on and so forth. Now, there has been a backlog of a lack of activities. There was a lull in the industry. We had the downturn in 2015. By the time it was picking up, we had COVID. So these things will peak. If this cycle stays for a longer period of time, it's going to come back. So those are actually more of fundamental issues. With the local companies, we have more of the capacity right now to deal with the local communities. I see a lot of...
Much more than the
IOCs. For the IOCs, it's difficult for them to manage the local communities. I'll give an example. Coincidentally, my company is also a multinational company. We also operate in the US and other countries. A local community, like what we do, in my company, the Nigerian company can basically have a CSR where we could basically say we're doing a community development. We pay directly to old people to help them. You could write these things.
That's paying directly to the citizens.
Basically, I would say intervention, social support, community support. You can do that. For an American company, it becomes difficult for you to explain those in America. And those are the relationships that the local people want. They want to see that you're actively supporting them. They want to see, if you're paying school fees, they want to see that it comes to the individuals. They want to see, if the family own a land, they want to see that you deal with them. We do not have those constructs within our constitution for you to deal with that on that level. And a lot of international companies, based on the complexities of that, how do we explain this, the auditing and all that, and
international best practices.
It's not really international best practice. It's not a lack of best practice. It's just a disconnect between two different cultures or two different...
that conflict in culture.
That conflict in culture. And again, because it's not their base, an international company would prefer to talk less to a community chief. They would go through consultants, we will go through consultants, and within that place you have a lot of conflict. So the fact that the local companies are growing, the ones that are on ground, I wouldn't name names, but they are doing very well. And that's where we expect over time, if the oil industry is stabilized, it will begin to pick up.
Are these some of the reasons why the multinationals are abandoning onshore, going offshore, divesting and all that?
Yes. Insecurity, which is part of this, because I'll give you an example. We'll move a bit to the sub-oil and gas sector, which is the petrochemical sector. Some people do it very well. I think one of the companies, and they have a very good relationship with the community in which they produce. They have an equity relationship with the community, so the community protects them. The community work towards them growing, right? They've built and developed, the former LMA petrochemical refinery has grown very massively. They pay a lot of taxes, they pay a lot of revenues, and you can see serious growth in that area. Yes, those are the kind of things you want to see. Now, if you have that relationship, you would see less community unrest, right? But if that relationship is not there, it goes into insecurity, community unrest, people would collaborate with people to vandalize your assets or steal from you and so on and so forth. The issue here is this, and significantly, we are not talking about that, but that is what the current admin has got right. The IOCs, the question is, why haven't they left the onshore operations all this while? Because it was just a mess. They weren't making much revenues. They were spending too much, maintaining facilities without a requisite return on investment. Now, they have moved away from that because the government has intervened through several presidential directives to have those deals close, which means they have divested a lot of those shallow water and onshore assets to, I would call them national players. Some of them are now international in other countries. And other.
Yes, so, on the surface they look national, but deep down you see that partnership with another.
There is that partnership, and sincerely, that's how we can grow. That's how we can grow. A lot of the problems we have here, the teething problems, they've had those problems and solved those problems in other countries, and you have the solutions. Again, the oil and gas industry is global. A stronger company, we have to go through that growth period. A stronger company will have more access to funding. They would have more access to cash flow, and so on and so forth. So that partnership, collaboration, partnership, for some of the very buoyant Nigerian companies, they also have funding and financial partners. So it's not something where we think we will develop the industry with just local solutions. It's more of a global, local interaction and integration, and that's what most other countries have done.
And very soon we may see Nigerian indigenous companies move over to other African countries, begin to buy equity stakes and all that.
It's not
Is that
it's not
possible in the near future?
It's not begin to. We are doing that.
Already?
My company has, coincidentally, our biggest operations and biggest project, still the recent one, was in Equatorial Guinea. If you go to Equatorial Guinea, you have a lot of Nigerian companies, the same with Gabon and Cameroon. Now, we have one of our companies that is the forerunner in acquiring an asset in Trinidad and Tobago. What we increasingly see is that these companies actually come to meet us. They come to meet the Nigerian companies because the Nigerian companies, some of them are becoming global brands. It will take time. It will need for us to be able to deal with the home ground very thoroughly, have some level of stability. But when that reasonable level of growth happens, Nigeria will be in the forefront of helping the region grow as such.
That would be an interesting scenario to envisage. Nigerian financial institutions having outlets across the continent, and now indigenous oil firms also pushing. I can't wait to the time when we'll be in that dominant position and make sure all these factor out well and end up well in our national interest. But let's look at gas. NNPC Limited, as a policy, regulatory agencies, even the federal government are saying we are shifting towards gas. Was much progress made in 2025 and what will likely play out in terms of this shift and transition in 2025?
I hear a lot talking about gas for decades, since 1985. The reality, in as much as Nigeria is oil-rich, Nigeria is actually a massively gas-rich country. So we have not optimized our potential in gas. The critical issue is infrastructure. LNG is leading the way. LNG is working on Train 7, which again is supposed to come on stream in 2027, the same 2027.
That's Train
7 for the LNG. The Ubeta non-associated gas development is also supposed to serve that. So that's another gas development. You have a few others. But this would be my personal opinion. I think we haven't gone far enough. We need to open up the gas sector totally.
Beyond rhetorics?
Beyond rhetorics. I think it's over-regulated. The involvement of the national gas company and several other national companies are too embedded in the system. You have to negotiate and speak with them too often. There are other productions where, because of the JV structures, the NNPC has all the gas. And from an investment perspective, businessmen would prefer to invest when they can control the entire chain. So yeah, some progress, but there's still a lot of work to do.
You talked about LNG Train 7 coming on stream. There were efforts in the past to also take final investment decisions for LNG products beyond the Bonny one in Bayelsa, we had one in Kogi State. But this didn't come to fruition.
Yes. Again, government-driven projects could be very complex to get to approvals. not because our government is specifically very difficult. It's going to be the same thing if you go to America or the UK. I don't see you getting through government approvals if it's government-driven. What those systems have done is to remove government from that whole process. So in our operations...
That's less government
interference? Yeah, in our operations in Texas, basically we have a small production. We acquired that field and produce and do everything apart from pay taxes, and we don't go to any ministry. So
the more you contact them, less the better.
No, the better
because these contacts are the ones that, the platform where corruption takes place.
Before we go to corruption, we're talking of the nature of government. Government is created in such a way that it has to be bureaucratic because they put in too many checks and balances. So if you need an approval, there are 5 or 6 different tables. It's a way to protect the system. And people don't understand, but it's not different. Even in the UK, if government has to approve a government investment in refinery, it might take 10 or 20 years because the Senate gets involved, debates get involved, politics get involved, and so on and so forth. So it's something that we need to work on, which is beginning to happen with the PIA, which I think did not go far enough because rather than the voluntary privatization, and I'm not saying government needs to hands off entirely, but they need to hold an equity stake.
Just as with LNG?
Just like as with LNG. Thank you. That's a very, very good model. That is what we need to replicate, and that is where we would have this capacity for growth.
And with NNPC's refinery, and one of those advocating the replication of LNG model towards the operation and management of these refineries, would that also resonate with you?
To be very, very sincere, it might be a controversial view, but I think NNPC has no business with those refineries. I'm not talking about a perception or an economic theory. I'm talking about the reality of Nigeria. We need to relinquish those refineries. I don't even care if we sell them or not. At this point in time, looking historically from when Obasanjo tried to privatize them, if you look at what we've sunk, the sunk cost in those refineries, it's a cesspool. It's a deep hole. Again, we don't have the benefit of doing much there because NNPC, for example, is a very big organization. You need companies that are specialized in that area to deal with it. So I hear you. We've been through this. Currently, they've brought Port Harcourt back on stream. I don't know how much they're producing or what the details are. But the issue is sustainability. Is it going to be sustained in the long run? Because we've gone through this cycle. The other question is how much have we spent to get to where we are now? So for me, and this is my opinion, I think two of the main things the NNPC need to relinquish as fast as possible would be the pipeline infrastructure and the refineries.
Very interesting. It will now enable the corporation, or the company rather, to concentrate on core areas of upstream and all that.
Thank you. That's the way I think we need to go. Now, I'm not saying this based on a theory. I'm talking about the facts and the evidence we have based on our Nigerian situation. You're right, there are countries that may be able to operate this. Our system has shown that it doesn't work. I don't think that the refineries have been profitable, apart from when they were very new, which would happen in any case. If you buy a brand new vehicle for a kid, it's going to maintain it for the first 3 years till maintenance and serious issues come up.
Perhaps we have to look at what other national oil companies are doing, Petrobras, Aramco. Is that the same format?
Petrobras is a good example. Aramco is very different from... Okay, first of all, you look at the structure of the country, the governing structure. Saudi Aramco is run in a monarchy, which is different. We have to understand that a democracy comes with its own challenges. You don't have a centralized power base.
Unity of command.
Yes. You have opposition parties. You have so many things that drag you from left to right. So, yeah, the Petrobras model has its own challenges, but they've got it right. The Petrobras model is that, and that is what we are, at least for a start, proposing for Nigeria. There's a significant part of Petrobras that is owned by private parties. They do have private persons sitting on the board of the company making private decisions. Petrobras has multiple refineries, but this is a funny thing. Our partners are Brazilian, so I spend a lot of time in Rio and in Sao Paulo in Brazil. That system is run almost like a private entity. Fuel in Brazil costs so much. If you go to Brazil, in Rio, you hardly see any person driving an SUV. They all drive small cars, 4-liter engines, because fuel costs a lot. Brazil also is one of the countries that has one of the largest investment in alternatives, biofuel. Just because the oil and gas downstream sector is operated entirely commercially, so you don't have subsidies and so on and so forth. And people find their way, which is the other thing probably I'm sure we will get to, price of fuel.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very high now because it's been deregulated. But when you deregulate with time, people find a way to adjust. What do I mean by that? Lagos, in Nigeria, I live in Lagos. In Lagos, you see more SUVs in VI and Ikoyi than you probably see in the countries where they manufacture those vehicles. And these are mostly 8-liter engines. So somebody's complaining, I spend X amount on fuel. But if it's really a problem, you can cut that down by driving an engine that is half of that. So that is that. But to answer your question, the Petrobras model is a good one. The Saudi model, I don't think we can pull that off. We can look at what Petrobras is doing, which is in line with what most of the Western world
Unlike
is doing.
in Brazil, in Saudi, subsidy is still a big issue?
I don't say subsidy is a big issue, for good enough, but those are fiscal controls. They still do what you call price fixing and price control. Now, that's different. You can have no subsidy, but you control the price, which means you move it up or down by fiat, which is what we've been doing anytime we say we want to deregulate. A deregulated system means...
Yes, we're doing price adjustments, and not deregulation.
Yes. Deregulation means exactly what you see in Brazil. If the price goes up, it goes up. We leave government out of it, no intervention. And what happens is, at that point, you see the creativity of the people. Again, there is the aspect of the impact of fuel on the economic activities in the country. So you also need government to have some level of activity to boost the economy, to support some of the downtrodden. For example, if we say fuel affects every price, immediately you increase it, it's because there are no alternatives. There is no mass transit.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot to do. It's a whole different discussion. But the way to go is deregulating that sector, removing government's interference, and allowing the system to peak. It's going to be difficult in the initial phase.
Okay.
But we need that.
Let's go for a break. When we come back, we want to find out from you whether the petroleum sector, especially the downstream, has been fully deregulated in Nigeria and where it will take us to in 2025. Do stay with us.
Nigeria's fuel scarcity and reliance on foreign energy have sparked concerns about an international conspiracy to hinder the country's development. This theory gained traction when considering Nigeria's decades-long importation of refined products. Some attribute this conspiracy to the nationalization of Shell refinery in the 1970s, which allegedly led multinationals to lose interest in investing in Nigeria's downstream sector. Despite having 4 refineries, Nigeria has struggled to maintain them, and the recent delay in the Port Harcourt refinery's rehabilitation has raised suspicions.
Refineries, by their very nature, are not high profit-yielding entities. The margin of gain for refineries is so thin, it's thinner than a strand of hair. It's that thing. So that is why the business of refineries or refining is usually undertaken by IOCs that are supported by their home countries or states themselves, state entities, so that's Aramco of Saudi Arabia, Petrobras of Brazil, Petrovista of Venezuela, and Sino Oil of China, and many other state-run oil companies. Now the reason is this: refineries essentially are set up to guarantee energy security globally, and there's a global consensus that the price of energy should at all times be managed to remain below the affordability thresholds of most citizens of the respective community of nations in the international circle.
Vice President Kashim Shettima in May 2024 said over $25 billion is used to import every year. The top destinations for petroleum import bills are Netherlands $20 billion, Belgium $15 billion, China $12 billion, India $10 billion, and the United States $8 billion. The consequences of this dependence include increased demand pressure on forex, foreign reserve instability, and inflation. Conversely, maximizing local crude oil refining capacity will reduce Nigeria's dependence on imports and channel $10 billion annually into stimulating Nigeria's economy.
We have signs that we are going in the right direction, and what we must be determined to do is to maintain those trends. Those trends will take us to where we want to go. And you've got to, when you say where will we get money from, the Ministry of Petroleum through the NNPC has committed to 2 million barrels a day.
By when?
2 million barrels a day at $80 a barrel takes us out of the woods, not just in the short term, but the medium term, because we will rally around that additional infusion of not just income, but foreign exchange to get the economy going and to attract investors and to bring down the exchange rate, bring down inflation, bring down interest rates.
However, the emergence of the Dangote refinery and other smaller refineries has raised hopes for reduced importation. Yet, Nigeria remains the net importer of petroleum products, fueling claims of an international conspiracy. Increasing local crude oil refining capacity could reduce dependence on imports and channel billions of dollars into stimulating Nigeria's economy. Experts argue that no international conspiracy can succeed without local collaboration.
There may be conspiracies, but must I behave the way the conspirators want me to behave? The most that having enemies does is make something harder. Enemies cannot make a task impossible. So even if there is a conspiracy, we can decide that we don't want to do this. You'll find that there are lots of conspiracies against India with their textile business, for example, but they have persevered. Lots of conspiracies against China. A lot of conspiracies against different countries, one can't go into that. But you'll find that those countries that have been able to move forward, the BRICS countries, have moved forward notwithstanding. It only makes it harder.
At the moment, if the refineries now begin to produce in full capacity, we will achieve near self-sufficiency in things like gas, oil, and aviation fuel.
The Petroleum Industry Act, PIA 2021, aimed to align Nigeria's energy sector with its economic interests, but its implementation remains uncertain. President Bola Tinubu, as the substantive Minister of Petroleum, has the power to ensure full implementation of the PIA. However, it is unclear if he has a team of patriotic Nigerians with the necessary expertise to navigate the challenges. The NNPC Limited seems to view other downstream players as competition rather than collaborators. Critics doubt that increased oil production will resolve the complexities without government support for private refineries to access crude supplies and produce fuel locally.
Thank you so much for staying with us. I've been with Samuel Diminas, Managing Director of Westpaq Engineering, a firm operating in the petroleum sector in Nigeria, an indigenous one. We are taking a look at major developments in the petroleum sector in 2025, and our project now looks for 2025. Thank you so much for staying with us. Before we went on break, we were talking about the issue of deregulation. You earlier raised it. Price adjustment versus deregulation. Now, President Tinubu has said it's full deregulation, and we are beginning to see as if we are getting towards there. Are we really there now?
We are not there. It's going to take a while. Apart from that, a food regulation would mean the government doesn't have a say on these decisions. We need to understand that there's a difference between how government is structured and how a commercial business is structured. There is a process, especially recommended in the PIA, to get there, and we're not going to achieve everything overnight. I'll give you an example. The NNPC is still government-controlled. It will take a while to move away from that. At this point in time, there is still no competition. We know the Dangote refinery is there.
BUA coming up?
BUA coming up. And there are a few other ones. I think one of the, what's the name? Former Niger Delta, one of these other companies actually have a refinery.
That's the modular refineries?
Yes, yes. If you add those modular refineries, it could bring some significant number online. Some of them have shut down their, or are not operating their petroleum production catalytic converters or crackers because there is no market for that. But we are beginning to get there where there is commercial pricing. But this is the point I want to make. Several factors would determine whether it is fully deregulated or not. We have to look at the forex, the price stability. Because every time there is, again, the Naira has been quite stable. Not in the long term, but for several months now. I think between November and today, we even see that the Naira is appreciating against the dollar. But if you have a situation where there is a depreciation like we had in the beginning of 2023, you could easily have a situation
and
where...
even 24,
yeah. If you would have a situation, if you have to go into straight commercial pricing, you would be looking at a hike in prices by 3 times. A system like this cannot absorb that. So you still have that intervention. You still have the managing directors of these national companies and the ultimate leadership of these companies, which is the minister, who is also the president, having the ability to intervene. Where would we be able to get to for us to say we are fully deregulated? It would be where we have competitors. It would be where we have multiple options.
Not just 3 options?
Not just one option. Right now, I think Dangote refinery is supplying to bulk buyers, but the question is, are they selling directly to the public? Are they contractors? Are they franchises? I'm not very clear on what those are. But there is also another concern that we've not raised. When we go away from government control and price fixing, we shouldn't allow the system to be kidnapped by cartels like Petroleum Tanker, the Association of Petroleum
so many of them
Traders
operating in
Association.
this sector.
For now, they are fixing prices. It is a crime. It's coincidentally, I was looking at something in the Constitution, a legal advice that was given to me by a legal counsel, and you're not supposed to be able to do that. But we, first of all, have to solve the first problem. When we do that, we need to get to a point where these people actually compete, not come together and say, today we are going to sell petrol 1,800.
Is it not where the regulator should come in?
That is the work the regulator should be doing entirely. But don't forget that the regulator is also busy producing and refining. So that is the point.
Are you referring to NNPC?
Yes, not NNPC. Okay. The NUPRC and all of them plus the NNPC work under one minister. Right?
Still subject to political control?
Supported by one secretary of, what is the deputy minister called?
Minister of State.
Minister of State, right? So, yeah, there's still some improvement that can happen there.
But even without Nigeria, just towards the end of 2025, beginning of this year, there's this gradual reduction in prices. So the hope of the president is that this reduction will continue to prove the point that the actions he took were the best for the country.
The action he took were very excellent. the FIDs we had, without the intervention of the president, it wouldn't come to pass. I know that because we are one of, we are participating in one of those projects. So the intervention was clear-headed, it was well thought out. There was a lot of interaction with the players and the government, which is good. It shows government commitment and support. But again, as I said, there are several factors that would affect price going up and down. One of them is the fluctuation of the dollar against the naira. Don't forget, as I said, between October and November, the naira has been picking up against the dollar. That alone can account for price adjustments
reductions,
in a positive direction. But I want to say this. There shouldn't be any economic policy that hinges on price reduction. We should not think of that. We should rather think of increasing the ability for Nigerians to earn a living. For example, if I want to build a house or buy...
That's increasing purchasing power.
Purchasing power, employment, salaries, implementation of minimum wage. There are many private companies that the MDs are billionaires, but they don't even pay their drivers and their house helps minimum wage. There is a lot you could do to get the economy on track. We need the economy to be more buoyant. You need the economy is too depressed at the lower level. There is no purchasing power. So we shouldn't be saying prices of things should come down to match that. No, I've not seen where that is a positive.
We should rather concentrate attention on increasing. What you just said struck me because I was mulling it through. Real capitalists paying mega salaries. The capitalists a firm will always look for where to relocate his industry if there are cheap labor. Doesn't care about whether the wages that are paid to these workers really leave them out of poverty. So these are opportunities the capitalists will exploit. That's where you have the government now. The capitalists, the firm, will not think about the overall welfare and well-being of citizens, but that's the responsibility of government.
So this is a misconception that the Western countries have understood a long time ago. I'll give you an explanation. If you go to any community, you would see more of an impact from philanthropists and successful people than you would see from the government.
Absolutely.
Nigeria is such a big country. The government sits in Abuja. How many ministers know where Okitipupa is? What would take them there? Now, if you have a man who is a very wealthy man in Okitipupa, yes, he may, at the point of developing his factory, be very aggressive. But if you look very well, he's the same person who will be bringing in philanthropic. So business wants to make profit and run the business well. But at the end of the day, when there is much revenue, they invest, and they also get into philanthropy. There is no rich, wealthy person in the world that doesn't have a foundation or an outreach for giving back. Now, the other part is...
And it's more prominent in Nigeria, sorry.
No, it's not more prominent. No, it's global.
No, I mean, okay, what we are seeing here, my view is that without the intervention of charity organizations, religious institutions, for instance, primary and secondary education in Nigeria would have collapsed. Because the government, at all levels, not putting in funding into this sector.
Yes, because you're looking at the federal government is limited in their capacity. This should naturally be local government responsibilities and to some extent the states. Some states are even too big that the central power within the states cannot get to even those nooks and crannies. But the point I want to make is this, which you said. We expect that government should always act in the best interest of the people, of the community, of the nation. But again, that has not proven to be the case because government itself is a collection of different interests.
Has been converted to a cartel, so it's what we call cabal here.
So it's not a Nigerian thing. If you go to any other developed countries, there are different interests. There are the ones who do not care, who say, oh, the people have to work hard, so we're not providing welfare. There are the ones who want to spend all the money on welfare. There are the ones who want to spend all the money on wars. There are some countries that are very wealthy. If you go there, there are so many poor people, but there is never a lack of funds to execute a war. So this is the nature of government. Again, the point I want to make is this. The capital is unchecked when it becomes a monopoly is a problem. But where you have businesses booming and growing and there are so many people able to come in, you remove restrictions. Then there's a check and balance.
And the trickle-down effect will come. Some will say these trickle-downs are never achieved. But let's expand the scope of our discourse here from our X-handle. Otunse has a position, and he says the petroleum industry has been grossly mismanaged, bad investment decisions. If NNPC Limited had a quarter of the money on downstream in the upstream, it will be producing 5 million barrels per day. Funding of gas projects is impossible because the gas terms came late. You want to react to this?
So the gas one, I agree that, as we said, there was no market there, but that's beginning to change. And it's going to take time to germinate. Concerning the mismanagement of the industry, the question, first of all, it was 100% government controlled. Even the upstream sector that was producing, our savior was that we were in partnership with independent companies who ran that show. So what part of government-controlled business in Nigeria is thriving? I don't see it. Let's go down to the states when I was young. If you go all across the states, you would have, in those days, seen so many investments. We used to have catering guest houses, hotels, run by state. Transportation companies and all that, they are all dead, fully dead. Because it is not the business of government to manage those things. There's a conflict of interest. Now, that is what you see across every sector, where government is fully in control. So I wouldn't blame the situation with the NNPC and with the refineries, why it is different from the upstream sector is that the refineries were 100% in the hands of government. There was no partnership or production sharing contract. It was government running that. So that was run aground over time. But again, we are beginning to see, not just based on national policies, but a germination and a collection of several interests pushing and putting pressure for these things to change. I think we are beginning to see ourselves move in that direction. The issue here is that this is not the first time we've done all these things. All these policies, all these pronunciations have been as old as Nigeria. The problem is sometimes we make one step forward, we move 3 steps backward. So we have to look whether these things are going to be sustainable in the long run. As I said earlier on, as far back as 2024, 25, 2004, 5, and 6, the OBJ admin had proposed a total deregulation. Earlier than that, total deregulation, selling of the refineries and all that. They made the move. It was rescinded.
Oil and gas sector.
We moved forward and backward, and so that's what's happening. What is my point here? We should not take glory. We are pointing at, we are moving in the right direction. There are minds that are beginning to think in the right direction, but we cannot start clapping our hands for ourselves till we see these things sustained after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It becomes a way of operation, and that's the system that is embedded. So that will take some time for us to get there.
So what do you envisage on a general note for the sector in 2025?
So the upstream sector is still very different from the downstream sector. So when you say sector, which of them are you referring to? Both.
Upstream, midstream, downstream.
Upstream, 2025 globally, and for Nigeria especially, as I said, we have banked projects where there are so many activities. We have already started activities on a serious main project since beginning of 2024. So these activities are very positive outlook for 2025. And
so will it affect production level? Can
yes.
we hit 2 million barrels per day by end of 2025?
No. It takes time to... The project we are working on is, first oil is going to be 2027. It takes time to be able to put in these facilities, to do what you need to do and come out. So the investments you see today are going to pay off down the line. But as I said, there are economic activities that are also good for the system. Because, for example, for every invoice we pay, there is VAT, there is withholding tax, so this is productivity. There is more revenue, more people are employed, and so on and so forth. But if we are talking about production specifically, you would still see decline in production because these fields need to be replaced. There hasn't been investment over time. So we have started to do that now. Several will come on stream, smaller ones, 2026. 2027 is a critical year where you see some significant uptick. For the refineries, moving in the right direction. The Dangote refinery is a very positive one. But let's see what happens. As long as there is not too much disruption. At this time, I'm seeing too much noise, too much back and forth, which is not very good.
Unhealthy for the sector.
Which is unhealthy for the,
Okay, we'll leave it there. Samuel Diminas wears the shoe so he knows where it pinches. He's the Managing Director of Westpaq Engineering.